You're only invited because they felt sorry for you. My husband said those words loud enough for everyone in the living room to hear. He didn't whisper them. He wanted everyone to hear. His parents laughed awkwardly. My sister-in-law looked down at her coffee. Even our daughter stopped coloring and stared at me with confused eyes. I forced a smile, but inside, something broke. That invitation wasn't to just any event. It was to one of the most prestigious charity galas in the city. A place where CEOs, judges, philanthropists, and influential families gathered every year. I had dreamed of attending ever since I started volunteering at local shelters. When I asked my husband why he thought I had been invited, he smirked. Because the organizers needed one more seat to fill. Nobody there even knows your name. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "So don't embarrass me. Smile, eat your dinner, and stay out of everyone's way." Everyone became silent. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't, because even I didn't understand why I had received that invitation. For the next 5 days, he repeated the same joke to anyone who would listen. My wife thinks she's important now. She actually believes she belongs with successful people. Every laugh cut a little deeper, but I stayed quiet, because hidden inside my purse was a letter I hadn't shown anyone. A letter carrying a name so powerful that if my husband had seen it, he would never have mocked me. Then the night of the gala finally arrived. As we stepped onto the red carpet, photographers suddenly stopped taking pictures of celebrities and turned every camera toward me. My husband frowned. "What are they doing?" Before I could answer, the chairman of the event walked through the crowd with several security officers behind him. He ignored every VIP guest. He walked past my husband without even looking at him, then stopped right in front of me. With thousands of people watching, he smiled warmly, reached out his hand, and said words that turned my husband's face completely pale. "Ma'am, we've all been waiting for you." In that single moment, the man who said I had only been invited out of pity realized he had absolutely no idea who his own wife really was. I still remember the exact moment my husband looked at me and laughed. It wasn't the kind of laugh people make after hearing a joke. It was the kind that was meant to humiliate someone. "You?" he said, holding the elegant invitation in his hand. "You've got to be kidding." He tossed the envelope onto the kitchen counter as though it were worthless. "I can't believe they're inviting people out of pity now." The room went silent. His parents were sitting at the dining table, enjoying coffee. His younger sister looked at me for a second before quickly lowering her eyes. Even our 8-year-old daughter stopped drawing with her crayons and looked from me to her father, confused by the sudden tension. I picked up the invitation carefully. The thick, cream-colored envelope had my full name embossed in gold letters, Mrs. Emma Carter. Below it were the words, "The Sterling Foundation Annual Charity Gala, one of the most exclusive charity events in the country. Business leaders, judges, celebrities, government officials, only invited guests could attend." I had stared at that invitation for almost 10 minutes when it first arrived that morning. I honestly believed it had been delivered to the wrong address, because women like me didn't receive invitations like this, or at least that's what everyone wanted me to believe. "You should call them," my husband Daniel said while cutting his steak, "and tell them they mailed it to the wrong person." His father laughed. "I agree." Daniel leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "They probably needed one extra guest." His sister chuckled. "Or maybe they felt sorry for you." The words landed harder than anyone realized. Not because strangers had said them, because my own family did. I quietly folded the invitation and slipped it back into its envelope. "I don't think it's a mistake." Daniel looked at me as if I'd just told the world's funniest joke. "You actually believe someone important invited you?" "I don't know, but my name is on it." He shook his head. "Emma." His voice softened for just a second before becoming even more insulting. "You volunteer at animal shelters. You organize food drives. You spend weekends helping homeless families. That's sweet. But people at this gala own billion-dollar companies. They don't invite ordinary women." His mother nodded. "He's only trying to protect you from embarrassing yourself." Embarrassing myself. I had heard those words for almost 7 years. Every time I wanted to try something new. Every time I dreamed bigger. Every time I believed I could accomplish more. Daniel always reminded me of my place. And eventually, I believed him. I wasn't a CEO. I wasn't famous. I didn't own a company. I wasn't rich. I simply believed that helping people mattered. Apparently, that wasn't impressive enough. Our daughter quietly stood from her chair and walked over to me. She slipped her tiny hand into mine. "Mom." I smiled gently. "Yes, sweetheart." I think your invitation is pretty. I knelt beside her. So do I. She whispered something that almost made me cry. I hope they know how nice you are. I hugged her tightly. So do I. Daniel rolled his eyes. She's filling the kid's head with fantasies now. I ignored him. There was no point arguing anymore. Not with someone who had already decided my worth. That night, after everyone went to bed, I walked into the small study at the back of the house. I opened my purse. Hidden inside was another envelope. Unlike the invitation, this one had no logo, no decorations, only my name. Inside was a handwritten letter. I had read it dozens of times already. Dear Mrs. Carter, thank you for 7 years of quiet service to our communities. While others chased recognition, you chose compassion. This year's gala is dedicated to individuals whose kindness changed lives without seeking applause. There will be a special presentation during the evening, and your attendance is essential. Please keep this confidential until the event. There was no signature, only a gold seal from the Sterling Foundation. I gently folded the letter again. That was why I hadn't argued with Daniel. Because I didn't fully understand it myself. How did they know about me? Who had nominated me? Why had they specifically asked me to tell no one? None of it made sense. The next morning, life continued as usual. I dropped our daughter off at school before driving to the neighborhood shelter where I volunteered 3 mornings every week. The moment I walked inside, the director, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, smiled warmly. Emma, morning. She looked unusually excited. I've been trying to reach you. Is everything all right? She nodded. Someone came looking for you yesterday. I frowned. For me? A gentleman. She lowered her voice. He was wearing a black suit. He asked several questions about your volunteer work. My heartbeat quickened. What kind of questions? How long you've been here? How many families you've helped? What kind of person you are? I stared at her. Did he tell you who he was? She slowly shook her head. No, but before leaving, he smiled and said, she deserves what's coming. For a split second, I wasn't sure whether those words were a promise or a warning. As I stood there trying to understand what was happening, my phone vibrated. It was Daniel. I answered immediately. Hello? His voice sounded irritated. Where are you? At the shelter. Come home. Why? We have visitors. What visitors? He paused, then said something that made my stomach tighten. 2 men in black luxury cars just pulled into our driveway, and they're asking for you. Daniel stood at the front window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek outside. His confident smile from that morning had completely disappeared. 2 identical black luxury sedans were parked in our driveway. Both had small silver flags mounted on the front fenders. 4 men in tailored black suits stood beside the vehicles. None of them looked like salesmen. None of them looked lost. They looked like professionals. The moment I walked through the front door, Daniel turned toward me. What did you do? I frowned. What do you mean? They're asking for you. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Daniel opened the door cautiously. The tallest man stepped forward. He looked to be around 50 years old, with neatly combed gray hair, a navy blue suit, white gloves, and a calm but authoritative expression. Good afternoon. His eyes immediately found me. Mrs. Emma Carter? Yes, he smiled politely. My name is Richard Lawson. I've been asked to personally deliver a message. Daniel quickly interrupted. What company are you from? Richard glanced at him briefly before returning his attention to me. I'm afraid the message is intended only for Mrs. Carter. Daniel's jaw tightened. I'm her husband, I understand. Richard remained perfectly calm, but my instructions are very specific. The entire room fell silent. Even Daniel's parents, who had been watching from the living room, exchanged confused looks. Richard removed a small velvet envelope from inside his jacket. It carried the same gold seal I had seen on my invitation. He handed it to me with both hands. The chairman asked me to remind you that your attendance this Saturday is extremely important. I'll be there. He nodded respectfully. And one more thing. He lowered his voice. The chairman is looking forward to thanking you personally. Daniel laughed. Thanking her. Richard slowly turned toward him. Yes, for changing more lives than she realizes. Without another word, Richard stepped back. The other suited men opened the car doors. Within seconds, both luxury sedans quietly drove away. No one inside the house spoke. Finally, Daniel looked at me. What was that about? I honestly don't know. He folded his arms. You expect me to believe that? I'm telling you the truth. His mother crossed her arms. This doesn't make any sense. His father nodded. People like that don't come to ordinary houses. Daniel looked directly at me. What exactly have you been hiding? I almost laughed. For years, no one in this house had cared enough to ask about my volunteer work. Now, suddenly, everyone wanted answers. I've hidden nothing. He stepped closer. Then explain why wealthy people keep showing up looking for you. I can't, or you won't. Before I could answer, our daughter ran into the hallway carrying a drawing she had made at school. Mom. She smiled brightly. I drew you. She held up the picture proudly. It showed me standing beside several children, handing out food boxes. Above the drawing, in large colorful letters, she had written, "My mom helps everyone." I felt tears gathering in my eyes. Daniel glanced at the drawing before looking away. Our daughter frowned. Daddy, yes? My teacher says helping people makes someone important. Daniel forced a smile. That's nice. No, she shook her head seriously. She said heroes don't always wear fancy clothes. The room became awkwardly quiet. I hugged my daughter. Thank you, sweetheart. That evening, after dinner, Daniel came into our bedroom. He leaned against the doorway. I've been thinking. About what? The gala. I looked up from the book in my hands. I think I'll go with you. I smiled slightly. I assumed you already planned to. I did. He hesitated. But now I'm curious. Curious. I want to see who these people really are. I nodded. So do I. He looked at me for several seconds. You know, if this turns out to be some kind of mistake, it's going to be embarrassing. I closed my book. Maybe. But if it isn't, he didn't answer. Instead, he simply walked away. Late that night, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone on the back porch. I looked at the stars while holding the gold-sealed letter in my hands. For 7 years, I had helped strangers because it felt like the right thing to do. I never asked for recognition. I never expected rewards. Whoever was behind this invitation knew things about my life that almost no one else did. Then my phone vibrated. An unknown number. I answered carefully. Hello? A calm, elderly voice spoke. Mrs. Carter? Yes. This is the chairman of the Sterling Foundation. My heart skipped a beat. I apologize for calling so late. Not at all. He chuckled softly. I simply wanted to tell you something before Saturday. I listened carefully. His next words sent a chill through my entire body. Please don't be surprised when everyone stands up the moment you enter the ballroom. The entire drive to the Sterling Foundation gala was silent. Daniel kept adjusting his tie every few minutes while glancing at me as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. You still haven't told me everything, he finally said. I've told you everything I know, he sighed. I just don't understand why they keep treating you like you're someone important. I looked out the car window. Neither do I. 20 minutes later, our car turned into the entrance of the Grand Royal Hotel. The place looked breathtaking. Luxury cars lined both sides of the driveway. Valets hurried from one vehicle to another. Television cameras covered the entrance. Elegant guests dressed in designer suits and expensive gowns walked across the red carpet while photographers shouted their names. Daniel smiled confidently. Now this is my kind of place. He adjusted his jacket one last time before stepping out of the car. As soon as we reached the red carpet, photographers ignored us completely. Camera flashes exploded around famous actors, politicians, and billionaire business owners walking ahead of us. Daniel whispered proudly, See, I told you. We're just regular guests. I smiled politely. Maybe. We continued walking toward the entrance. Then something unexpected happened. One of the photographers suddenly lowered his camera. He looked directly at me. His eyes widened. He quickly whispered something to another photographer. Within seconds, more cameras turned toward us. Flash, flash, flash. Daniel frowned. What are they doing? Before I could answer, several event staff members wearing black suits hurried toward the entrance. They weren't looking at celebrities. They weren't looking at politicians. They were looking at me. Daniel laughed nervously. They probably think you're someone else. But the staff kept coming. Then the ballroom doors opened. An elderly gentleman in a perfectly tailored tuxedo stepped outside. The moment I saw the gold Sterling Foundation pin on his lapel, I knew exactly who he was. The chairman. He smiled warmly. Without greeting anyone else, he walked straight past dozens of wealthy VIP guests, past television reporters, past celebrities, past Daniel. He stopped directly in front of me. Then, to everyone's complete surprise, he extended both hands toward me. Mrs. Emma Carter. His voice echoed through the silent entrance. Welcome. It is an honor to finally meet you. Daniel stood frozen. The chairman smiled kindly. You've spent 7 years changing lives without asking for recognition. Tonight, it's our turn to honor you." Before I could respond, he turned toward the ballroom. With a simple gesture of his hand, the orchestra suddenly stopped playing. Every conversation inside the massive ballroom came to an end. Hundreds of guests turned toward the entrance. The chairman spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, our guest of honor has arrived." Then something unbelievable happened. One by one, every single person inside the ballroom stood to their feet. Business leaders, judges, celebrities, government officials. They all began applauding. The sound echoed throughout the entire hall. Daniel looked around in complete disbelief. His lips moved, but no words came out. Only 5 days earlier, he had told me I was invited out of pity. Now, he was standing beside the woman receiving a standing ovation from the most powerful people in the country. And the biggest surprise of the night hadn't even begun yet. The applause seemed endless. I stood frozen near the ballroom entrance, completely overwhelmed. I had spent years helping strangers without expecting anything in return, and now hundreds of the country's most influential people were standing to honor me. The chairman smiled warmly. "Mrs. Carter, would you join me on stage?" I nodded, still trying to process what was happening. As we walked through the ballroom, people stepped aside with genuine respect. CEOs shook my hand. Judges thanked me. Business owners smiled, as if they had known me for years. Behind me, Daniel followed in complete silence. The same man who had laughed at my invitation only days earlier now looked completely lost. Once we reached the stage, the chairman picked up the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's gala is not about wealth." He paused. "It is about humanity." The ballroom became completely silent. For 7 years, one woman has quietly supported homeless shelters, paid for children's medical treatments, delivered food to struggling families, and helped countless people rebuild their lives. He looked at me, and she did all of it without asking for recognition. Large screens behind the stage suddenly lit up. Photographs began appearing one after another. There I was serving meals at homeless shelters, reading books to sick children in hospitals, helping elderly people rebuild their homes after floods, comforting families who had lost everything. Daniel stared at the screen in disbelief. I never knew," the chairman continued. "Many of these charitable projects were close to shutting down." Then Mrs. Emma Carter arrived, not with cameras, not with publicity, but with compassion. The audience applauded again. Then a little girl, no older than 10, walked onto the stage carrying a bouquet of white roses. She smiled shyly and handed them to me. "You saved my mommy," she whispered. Tears filled my eyes. I knelt down and hugged her tightly. The chairman smiled. "Mrs. Carter, because of your extraordinary service, the Sterling Foundation proudly presents you with this year's Humanitarian Heart Award." A beautiful crystal award was placed in my hands. The audience rose for another standing ovation. I looked toward Daniel. Tears were running down his face. He slowly walked onto the stage. In front of hundreds of guests, he lowered his head. "I'm sorry, Emma." His voice trembled. "I spent years measuring people by money, status, and success. I never stopped to see the incredible woman standing beside me." The ballroom became silent once again. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I spoke softly. "Respect shouldn't begin after public applause. It should exist when no one is watching." Daniel lowered his eyes. He finally understood. 5 days earlier, he had said I was invited out of pity. Tonight, he realized the invitation had never been about pity. It had been about honoring a woman whose kindness had quietly changed countless lives, while the man closest to her had never taken the time to notice. Daniel stood motionless in front of me, his head lowered, his hands trembling at his sides. The ballroom that had been filled with applause only moments earlier was now completely silent. Hundreds of people watched as the man who had once laughed at me struggled to find the courage to look into my eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." For years, I had imagined what this moment would feel like. I thought I would be angry. I thought I would want revenge. I thought I would finally tell him how much his words had hurt me. But standing there with the Humanitarian Heart Award in my hands, I realized something. His apology wasn't what healed me. The truth had already done that. I smiled softly, not because everything was suddenly okay, but because I no longer needed his approval to know my worth. The chairman stepped beside me and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Carter," he said into the microphone, "there is one final surprise this evening." The audience looked toward the stage with curiosity. He smiled warmly. Most people believe generosity begins with money. He paused. But the greatest gift a person can give is their time. He turned toward the large screen behind us. The screen lit up once again. This time it wasn't photographs. It was video. One after another, families from different cities appeared on the screen. A single mother smiled through tears. "You paid my rent when my children had nowhere to sleep." An elderly man held up an old photograph. "You visited me every Sunday after everyone else forgot about me." A young nurse spoke next. "When our children's hospital ran out of supplies, you arrived before anyone even asked." Then dozens more faces appeared. Children, veterans, teachers, volunteers, shelter workers. One after another they thanked me, not for money, for being there. Many of them didn't even know my last name. The audience wiped away tears. Even the reporters stopped taking notes for a moment. The chairman looked toward me. "Mrs. Carter, you've reminded all of us that kindness doesn't need an audience." The ballroom erupted into another standing ovation. This time I noticed something different. Daniel wasn't clapping. He was crying. Not quiet tears. The kind of tears that come when someone realizes they spent years standing beside an extraordinary person without ever seeing them. After the ceremony ended, guests formed a long line to shake my hand. Business leaders asked if they could support the shelters where I volunteered. Doctors offered free medical care for struggling families. Company owners pledged scholarships for children. One act of kindness had inspired hundreds more. As the ballroom slowly emptied, Daniel approached me one last time. "I know I can't change the past," he said. "I judged you by your title instead of your character. I thought success was measured by money." He looked around the ballroom. "Tonight I learned that real success is measured by the lives you change." I listened quietly. Then I answered honestly, "I hope you remember that lesson." He nodded. "I will. But I also know I may have lost the privilege of walking beside you." I didn't answer immediately. Some wounds heal. Some relationships don't. I simply thanked him for coming and walked toward the exit. Outside, the cool night air felt different, lighter, peaceful. As I stepped onto the red carpet, our daughter ran toward me with the biggest smile on her face. She threw her arms around me. "I knew you were special, Mommy." I laughed through my tears. "And how did you know that?" She looked up at me with complete confidence. "Because you help people even when nobody is watching." I hugged her tightly. Out of all the awards I received that night, those words meant the most. As we drove home, I looked out the window and smiled. 5 days earlier, my husband had said I was invited out of pity. Tonight, he finally understood the truth. Pity may open a door, but character earns a standing ovation. And I had never needed anyone's permission to become the woman I was always meant to be.